Hey, good evening, everybody. I am here with Larry Johnson, ex-CIA analyst. We are discussing the conflicts in the world, and Larry is the founder of Sonar21.com. The link is in the description box if you want to check out his work. So first off, huge thank you for coming on the channel for the first time, Larry.
Well, appreciate the invite. See, you've been having some of my mates on.
Yeah, we've had a slew of your mates on this week, and we've covered a lot about Russia and Ukraine. So I think this time we'll start differently. My first question for you actually is, as an ex-CIA analyst, what did that involve, and how did that affect your worldview?
Well, there's the theory, and then there's the practice. In theory, the CIA analyst is supposed to be objective. That regardless of what your own political views are, regardless of what your own political preferences are, you're supposed to come in and be a referee to call, as we say with baseball, call balls and strikes and call it fairly. Don't look up and say, "Oh, yeah, that's my brother-in-law, so we're going to give him some extra help," or that you discriminate in any way. So, I was introduced to the profession by a man by the name of George Allen. George had been in charge of analysis over Vietnam during the height of the Vietnam War. And he took a lot of scars from that experience. And he described to us what it was like to face political pressure to lie, basically, to shade the intelligence so it would serve the purposes of the operations folks. And he resisted it. But he described getting phone calls from Robert McNamara, who was Secretary of Defense, McGeorge Bundy, who was the National Security Advisor to Lyndon Baines Johnson, the president, and even calls from Johnson saying, "Hey, why don't you be a team player?" So what he'd introduced us to as I was a new analyst, was this concept of political pressure generated because of the desire of politicians to have their particular policy supported. And lo and behold, I was tossed into the soup as the analyst, the only analyst for Honduras. And Honduras was basically the land-based aircraft carrier for the United States during the war against Nicaragua, the Contra Wars, as we called it. And so that process of being an analyst, when you tried to, I learned that when you tried to step back, despite what your political views were, and call it straight, you would run into problems. I remember periodically, once a quarter, we would have what was called a warning meeting, where the National Intelligence Officer for Latin America would gather all of the Latin American analysts to say, okay, what are the issues? What are the top priorities, things we ought to be looking at going forward? And so as I was doing my brief, I said, and the Contras, and he said, stop right there. I went, what? You can't call them the Contras. You must call them the Nicaraguan Democratic Resistance. And I went, but wait, the president, who was Reagan at the time, I said, he calls them the Contras. He goes, yeah, but he's the president. So I experienced the Alice in Wonder world. And unfortunately, it's gotten worse for analysts since my time there, because the analysts have been subsumed under operations. Back when I was there, the Central America branch was on one side of the building. The Central American Task Force, which is managing the operations side of affairs, was on the exact opposite side of the building. And there was always pressure from the ops guys to try to get us analysts to shape, shade, spin, however you want to call it, because they were manufacturing a situation, and they didn't want us to disrupt their narrative at all. And I had firsthand experience seeing that, where we had one guy on the ops side, and he was former West Point grad, and he would write out what are called operations orders for the Contras. And an operations order is on October 1st, Sean, you will proceed from coordinate XYZ to coordinate ABC. And at such coordinate, you will set up an ambush, and you will carry with you, you will have 15-member platoon, and you will have this number of rifles and this type of ammunition, go all that kind of detail. And he'd send it down to the Hondurans, the Nicaraguans who are hunted out in Honduras, who are the Contras. But then what he did, he turned around and he produced it as a human intelligence report, claiming that it had happened. Now, it really hadn't happened, but because you write it up, because you put it formally into the system, it then becomes real. It happened because you got intelligence. It says here, right here, in black and white. According to source XYZ, this group of Contras carried out this attack on October 1st at this location. So, that's where I got to look behind the curtain and went, huh. So that's how the sausage is made.
So what did you think of the shenanigans of Colonel Oliver Norf and Felix Rodriguez back then?
Well, believe it or not, I knew Ollie. So when I did an 8-week internship at the Central American Task Force. And actually, I don't know if you can see it. It's up on my shelf. I still have a photo. The Congress was getting ready to vote on whether to lift the prohibition on funding the Contras. So we on the operations side, they made up 600 postcard size, and it shows Daniel Ortega, who was the president of the Sandinistas, Nicaragua at the time, Miguel Descoto, who was the foreign minister, standing side by side with Muammar Gaddafi, and they all got their hands up. Here, let me grab
it. So if you are watching, and with Larry Johnson, ex-CIA analyst, if you've got questions, please put them in the chat. Wow, look at that. Yeah. Yeah, we can see that, Larry.
Okay.
Wow.
See that? Okay. Unless you think I'm telling the story. So my job was to take 535 of those down to the White House to give them to Ollie North. And so I trundled down to the White House, and out comes Fawn Hall, Oliver North's secretary. And I delivered him to her. She was, far more attractive than he was. But later I dealt with one of my business partners, was actually initially in business with Ollie North when he was selling bulletproof vests after he left government service. But yeah, I knew him. I didn't know Felix Rodriguez. I know of him, but did not know him personally.
So you're talking about, manufactured lies. What was your perspective when Tony Blair and Bush got together and said Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction?
Well, initially, I was invited by Dimitri Simes. If you know who Dimitri Simes is, he was recently indicted in the United States as a Russian spy. Dimitri fled the Soviet Union in 1972, found safe haven in America at that time. He'd been in Soviet prison as a dissident. His parents were human rights lawyers, and came to the United States, became a citizen, and was tabbed as a Russian expert, and wound his way into the middle of the foreign policy elite. Met President Nixon after Nixon left office, and became head of the Nixon Center. It was later called the Center for National Interest. So in December 2002, Dimitri would regularly put together panels and group discussions, small groups. And I was one of about 20 people invited to attend a session discussion. Are we going to go to war with Iraq? And that meeting included a man by the name of Pat Lang, who had been the chief of the Middle East Division, the Defense Intelligence Agency. He had set up the Arabic program at West Point. He had been defense attaché to Saudi Arabia and Yemen, knew the Middle East extensively. Ambassador Joseph Wilson, the husband of Valerie Plame, who was one of my colleagues at CIA by happenstance. James Schlesinger, former director of the CIA. Charles Krautheimer, who was a pundit on Fox News. Me, again, I look back, I don't know how the hell I got the invitation, but I was pretty ubiquitous on television back then as a talking head. And I got the invite. So we were there discussing, what was this going to happen? And all of us sort of said, well, maybe they've got to have some secret information that we just, don't know about. Because everything else we knew at that point was like, this was nonsense. It was only after the invasion, end of April, that I got contacted with one of my buddies who was on the National Intelligence Council. And he says, this is all a fraud. This is fabrication. There are no weapons of mass destruction. So I went on National Public Radio and was interviewed by Michelle Norris in May of 2003 and denounced the war as a fraud, that there was a fabrication. Now, that created some problems for me because I was friends with Jerry Bremer, L. Paul Bremer, who was sent to Iraq to be in charge of the whole operation. And I tried to help Jerry, when he was named. We actually had lunch just the week before he got named to that position. And when I found out about it, I said, hey, let me introduce you to Pat Lang, because Pat had hand-carried intelligence to the government of Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. So he knew the country inside out. And Bremer goes, no, I don't need to talk to anybody. Okay. But it was after I came out and started speaking out against that war that I became a bit of a pariah. So, and what's interesting is I did not know that Valerie Plame, my former classmate, was actually in the middle of all this. I hadn't paid attention to her getting exposed until one of my classmates called up and said, hey, you realize that's our Valerie? And I went, what? Because when we went through training, we didn't know each other's last names. We were all undercover. So I knew her as Valerie P. and not Plame. And certainly didn't know that she had married Joe Wilson until after her that entire exposure.
I'm curious to know then, with your vast experience and being so close to all of this, when Bush and Blair got together and announced that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, what was their motivation?
Oil. Recommend you have Gary Vogler on your show. Gary's written a book. Gary was the first American oil minister in Iraq after we invaded. He was the guy in charge. And he and Larry Wilkerson, Colonel Larry Wilkerson, there was a period where Vogler actually didn't appreciate how crucial the whole oil racket was, and Dick Cheney's roles. I mean, his previous role with Halliburton, goes just to underscore the corruption. Cheney in particular is as I said, emblematic of what's wrong with Washington, the corruption that's there. And I know the backstory on him because a very dear friend of mine who's no longer with us was Cheney's first boss in Washington, D.C. back in 1972. Bruce Bradley at the time, I think, he was still a young guy, about 31, set up a consulting firm called Bradley Woods. And he got a call one day from a fellow named Don Rumsfeld. Well, it turned out that Bruce, 8 years earlier, was a congressional staffer. He was the staff director for a member of Congress, and he played squash every week with Don Rumsfeld. They were, that was Rumsfeld's thing too, play squash and racquetball. And so Bruce and Rummy did that. So Rummy calls him up in 1972 and says, "Hey, I got this young guy. I need to get him a job." And it was Dick Cheney. So here's Cheney, the guy can't wait to send other people's kids to war, doing everything in his power to avoid going to Vietnam. And, made sure that he didn't enlist, made sure he didn't sign up. And instead, he was enjoying 2 martini lunches and 3 packs of cigarettes a day. And it was, he stayed in that job until he got the offer to go become the chief of staff to Gerald Ford after Nixon resigned. Yeah.
Your screen froze momentarily though. You're back now though. You're fine.
Okay.
Yep. Keep going on, Cheney, please.
Okay. So, Cheney gets that chief of staff job, and then he goes back to Bradley Woods, hangs out so he can run for Congress from Idaho, or Wyoming. I can't remember. It was Wyoming or Idaho. He's not from there. I mean, but, maybe at one point, but, here he is in Washington, D.C. But anyway, he gets into Congress and then gets on the right committees. Then when he leaves Congress, he gets tabbed early on as Secretary of Defense and, serves that. And I guess that was in the George H.W. Bush administration, I believe. And, goes to work at Halliburton and becomes wealthy, fabulously wealthy by just those contacts. So that's what I'm talking about, the corruption there. That's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading like the itemization of things that Halliburton would bill the taxpayers for. Like if a soldier had a banana in the chow hall, the American taxpayers would pay like $20, $30. I mean, how much money do you estimate Cheney made off this?
I don't know, just a lot. So he made enough that he was a multimillionaire. And how do you get to become a multimillionaire on a government salary? But he's not the only one. Barack Obama did it, and Bill Clinton did it. George W. Bush did it. The only one that hasn't done it was Donald Trump. And I'm not saying I'm not some rabid Trump supporter. That's one of the reasons he's so hated and despised. He's not willing to play the incest game that is Washington, D.C.
And is that why, in your view, there are all these assassination attempts on him?
Yes. Yeah. He represents a real threat to this deep state. If your entire system is basically based upon bribery and blackmail and corruption, and again, I'm not trying to pretend that Donald Trump is some saint. He in his business practices up in New York, he was known to stiff a contractor or two. So he did. I'm not suggesting that he always conducted himself honorably, but he's not one that's going to come in and say, "Okay, hey, yeah, you want this government contract? You give me a taste." I mean, you've had Matt Ho on your show, and Matt described as one of his early encounters in Iraq, where he had like $10 million to deliver to these Iraqis, and was sitting there on the table, and he placed it out there, and the Iraqis started signaling at him, like going, "Okay, yeah." And he said, "What?" He goes, "Well, you need to take your share." And Matt is a straight up guy. He's going, "What? No, I'm not doing that." And they go, "Well, that's what the other guy did That's what your predecessor did before you got here. So, you know, that's how it works. And it's just, Washington, D.C., really, it's a cesspool of money. And that's why, this is an organized effort going after Trump. Anybody that believes that this is just a lone wolf, particularly this last guy, Shane, Ruth or haven't figured out how to pronounce his name, but his ties to Ukrainian intelligence, his ties to Ukraine are extensive. And he's supposedly an unemployed guy that's traveling around the world multiple times, or to Ukraine freely, in and out. Had didn't have a clunker, had a fairly expensive automobile, and there he is. I guess turns out he drove into Florida. Initially, I thought he had flown in and bought a car, but no, he drove down, and then was looking at driving to Mexico apparently as an escape route. But he had intelligence, and he's a 3-time convicted felon reportedly, which means no way he didn't go in and buy the AK-47. So he got it in the open market somehow. So they just they didn't follow him.
When you say he had intelligence, do you mean like how he knew where to be, where Trump was going to be?
Yeah.
And where do you suspect that intelligence came from?
I don't know. A lot of suspects. It could have been Ukraine. Could have been someone within the Secret Service. What's interesting about that precise location where he was at. I learned this after the fact. A buddy of mine who did 30 years with DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, and then his last 10 years spent with the West Palm Beach Sheriff's Department. Well, he was in charge of the Forensics Investigation Unit. Their offices are just literally around the corner from that location, and there's a post office across the street. So you got a government, you got government cameras and surveillance. This guy was operating in a, anybody that would go out in advance to do reconnaissance, to surveil a site, to figure, where we're going to be most secure. Boy, this is like jumping right into the middle of a hornet's nest, but he had the confidence to do so.
Well, you got a question from Gene. Does Larry think Trump will make it to the elections, or will his adversaries cause a war or take him out before the votes take place?
Well, I think there are two different scenarios there. Will they cause a war? Potentially. That's likely to be Israel. Israel's doing its damnedest to get the United States roped into that war. But I do think Trump he'll make it to the election. And judging by what I call sort of the panic that's evident on the Democrat side of the House, they must be seeing some internal polling and things that suggest that Kamala's going to get walloped, that she's not going to win. So again, like I said, Trump's got his flaws. I mean, he was terrible at selecting personnel. And, I'm not sure he's corrected that problem. We'll see.
You think he would be coming back with a different perspective after bullets flying past his head? All right, you got a question from Ray. Larry, your thoughts on the DOJ releasing the Ruth letter, which offered $150,000 to anyone who succeeded to do what he had failed?
Yeah, if Monty Python was doing this as a skit, it would be hilarious. But this is the DOJ saying, "Oh yeah, let's show you the letter where there's $150,000 out there if you kill Trump." I think it's reprehensible. There was no need to release that.
It's like the Praetorian Guard was established to protect the emperor, and then they ended up being the biggest threat to the emperor. All right, so we've had tons of questions come in on various platforms, but I think I'd like to start, now you've done this introduction, and that was fascinating, going back to Iran-Contra and stuff. I'd like to start with what's happening in the last couple of days with Hezbollah, Israel, Lebanon. I mean, you said they're trying to make it into a larger war, and that could possibly drag America in. So could you perhaps describe the scenario that could occur?
Yeah. So, and in fact, I just an acquaintance of mine who's I'll call him a diehard Zionist. He just sent out a note today that, boy, Israel. In fact, okay, maybe I should read it because it really is unbelievable. This just gives you some insight into the thinking of these people. Here's what he wrote. Israel has no choice but to attack Iran and destroy the nuclear facilities now, or it will be too late. They will do it and will destroy the oil fields. So I wrote him back and I said, so Israel, after 11 months, now 12 months, has been unable to destroy Hamas. And after 3 weeks of bombing, has been unable to destroy Hezbollah. But they're going to go 1,500 miles to the east and destroy Iran, who actually has some robust air defense systems. How does that work? So what you have is Israel's detached from reality. They failed militarily to defeat Hamas, as they said that they were at the outset. That's number one. They've embarked on what can only be described as a policy of genocide, of exterminating the Palestinians, which is why the number of civilian casualties is just so enormous. If you compare Russia's been involved in a war in Ukraine where there are civilians for 2.5 years now. And on average, the number of civilians that have died in Ukraine over that time frame is about 329 per month. It's a bad figure, but it's 329. Whereas in Israel, it's almost 4,000 a month. They're killing 4,000 of the civilians a month without any regard. At least the Russians have made a conscious effort to try to minimize those casualties. So now here's Israel embarked on trying to, quote, destroy Hezbollah, except Hezbollah is below ground. They're not above ground. They do place out dummies, and they'll put a group of logs together that may be painted and designed to look like a missile launcher, and Israel will blow that up. Well, they're not blowing up anything important. At the root of all this is Israel wants to get a war started with Iran and have the United States destroy Iran, except the problem is the United States is not even capable of that. Even if we use nukes, what we've demonstrated is that the United States has become a bit of a paper tiger, where we got an expensive military on paper, but when it comes time to actually operate, we have trouble. Look at what happened with the Houthis. The U.S. Navy announced Operation Prosperity Guardian back in December of 2023, and this was going to keep the sea lanes open in the Red Sea so ships could come and go. Failure. U.S. failed. They could not stop the Houthis from launching missiles, drones, rockets at ships that were destined for Israel. And what the Houthis succeeded in doing was closing down the port in Eilat. So this is the United States is incapable of stopping the Houthis. Yeah, we're going to stop Iran. Yeah, that makes total sense in this bizarre world. So what we're going to see, I think, over the next couple of weeks is Israel's going to try to provoke a reaction from Hezbollah that in some way or fashion will justify bringing the United States in. And, unlike the war in Ukraine, the Biden administration, I think driven primarily by political reasons, decided to deploy troops. I've heard that they were being deployed I've heard contradictory things, that they were showing up in Israel or they're being sent to the Persian Gulf, to Oman. I don't know specifically where they've unloaded, but just putting 40,000 more troops into the, or 5,000 more troops, bringing the total up to 40,000 in the region, it's meaningless. They can't do anything except maybe push-ups, calisthenics.
So I was watching Gerard Salente on Galloway before I came and spoke to you this evening, Larry. And Gerard was saying that basically, you've got this piece of land, Israel, in the middle of the Muslim world, about 10 million people.
Right.
You've got, I think it was 100 million in Iran. And they would, Netanyahu, he would go nuclear if it all escalates. Do you think it could escalate into nuclear war?
Well, yeah, you can go nuclear, but nuclear doesn't solve anything other than make Israel a bigger target. Because Iran has built its key nuclear facilities underground. They're not above ground, where a nuclear blast could devastate them. I've been personally involved with scripting exercises to deal with the issue of how do you attack a site that's underground and have some measure of success. It's extraordinarily difficult. And the terrain features in Iran alone mitigate against some of the capabilities of air power. That's one of the other things that's really fascinating, Sean, is that going back in history to World War II, to the Battle of Britain, there's always been this assumption, both by Hitler and by the Allies, that, man, if we just use enough air power, just enough bombs, just enough planes dropping ordnance on people, that'll bring the war to an end. And I call it the more cowbell strategy. After that Saturday Night Live skit where, they playing the Blue Oyster Cult's a hit, and there's Will Ferrell banging the cowbell, and every so often Christopher Walken walks out and says, "We need more cowbell." That's been the approach with air power. Vietnam, more cowbell. Let's put those, at no point has the use of air power been able to unilaterally decide and alter a conflict. It's always required ground forces in some form or fashion. And they keep looking for the magic. Well, here, we've seen Israel for now 12 months, going back to October of 2023, been bombing the hell out of Gaza. I mean, bomb after bomb after bomb after bomb. It was surprising there are any buildings left standing. Has the war stopped? No. Has Hamas given up? No. Is Hamas recruiting more people? Yes. Is Hamas still killing Israeli soldiers? Yes. So what exactly did we achieve with 12 months of bombing? That now they're going to do what? More bombing in Lebanon, and that's going to make a different outcome? Especially where the Hezbollah forces are more secure. They've got better underground facilities. I mean, they've had 14, 16 years to build those up and have created, they're literally big enough that you can drive trucks and cars underground. And Israel's going to keep dropping these bombs on the surface and destroy Hezbollah? It's not going to happen. And so what Hezbollah is hoping for is that the Israelis will come to them. That Israel will repeat what it did in 2006, that it will launch a ground invasion into southern Lebanon. And this time Hezbollah will really inflict some casualties on them, significant casualties. Then at that point, Israel's in a desperate strait.
So earlier, Larry, you said that the weapons of mass destruction lie. The main motivation was oil. Mm-hmm. So if Netanyahu escalates and isn't there the temptation for those same vested interests behind American geopolitics to invade Iran to get the Iran's oil?
The United States has no ability to invade Iran. It's they might as well say their goal is to ride a white unicorn around the Capitol next year. Okay. So number one, to invade Iran, the United States would need an army of at least 4 million people. So first we'd have to find them, because right now our army only has 452,000. So, basically you gotta increase it dramatically. Number one. Number two, then you're going to have to forward deploy them. You're going to have to move those forces forward, just like we saw, in the lead up to the Gulf War in 2003. U.S. forces started moving into the area in June of 2002. There's a six to 8 month buildup of forces. Then once you get there, how are you going to get them into country? What are you going to do, an amphibious operation? Because Iran has a significant naval force and they've got shore defenses and have the potential to disrupt and destroy what the United States would bring to try to land troops. You don't have enough airlift to get them all in any kind of timely fashion. And then the simple fact that we've already seen the United States with well over 150,000 troops was unable to quell activities in Iraq. Iraq is 1/4 the size of Iran. And Iran's got more mountains and terrain that the United States can't control. Just madness. I mean, it's one of these, like I said, it's a white unicorn fantasy. It is divorced from reality. The United States has no capability of doing it. And those who talk about doing it are just completely lacking in any kind of understanding of U.S. military capabilities. We think we can bomb our way to victory. We can't. And we certainly don't have the ability to put troops in on the ground to do it. So we're trying to provoke a fight that is completely unnecessary.
Question from Roman. IDF is doing some limited action in South Lebanon. How does Hezbollah communicate military action?
They use fiber optics. So, in fact, Alistair Crook he was interviewed with Judge Napolitano the other day, and I talked again to Alistair today. Hopefully I'll get that video up and published in the next 2 days. But Alistair, back in the early, 20 years ago, he was the British diplomat, but involved with intelligence operations. And he dealt with both the Israelis and with the Hezbollah and with Hamas and with the Palestinian Authority. He dealt with them all. And he saw firsthand after 2006 that the Hezbollah was using fiber optic to communicate. They weren't using pagers and walkie-talkies. Those pagers and walkie-talkies that were used in this terrorist attack last week, those were for civilians, not military personnel, because Hezbollah is also a government organization, a quasi-government organization. They provide social services, education, healthcare. And so a lot of the people who were killed and wounded in that terrorist attack were civilians who were doing jobs that were not related to military activity.
So Nikki's wondering whether you believe that Hamas is an Israeli creation and all this was pre-planned. I was suspicious when the attack went down last year and they just got through all the Israeli defenses so rapidly.
No, Hamas is a legitimate organization. But shortly after it was created, Mossad decided to start pumping money into Hamas, not overtly, not doing it. Say, hi, we're from Mossad. We got a check for you. No, they didn't do it that way. It's where the people in Hamas thought that they were getting money, from a benefactor in the Middle East. And why? So why did Israel do that? Well, Israel was using Hamas as a tool to sabotage any potential peace accord, and so it was there to disrupt the Palestinian Authority. It was there to basically throw a wrench into any of the peace efforts, and it was successful, and it was cynical, very cynical on the part of Israel. Over the years, you'll hear a common refrain in the United States that it's always the Palestinians who rejected these sincere, genuine overtures of peace from Israel and just refused to do it. No, nonsense. It was just the opposite. Israel was playing the game at that. Hey, oh yeah, we're serious about trying to promote peace, but they went out of their way to make sure that it was always sabotaged and that the Palestinians would get the blame for the sabotage. So what happened October 7th? It was a well-planned military operation by Hamas. It was, I think Netanyahu may have known it was going to happen, but just assumed out of arrogance. Never underestimate the arrogance of the Israelis. Having dealt with, I have dealt with them in some occasions, and the problem is that they've got a bad attitude. You can't teach them anything because they know it all. They already know it. You can't teach me a thing. I know what I'm doing. Something as simple as how to carry a semi-automatic pistol. The Israelis insist that you must carry it unloaded. Why? Because then in their brain, they've developed this technique where they're so great at drawing and quickly racking around into the chamber. Well, actually, the real reason they do it is their troops are so poorly trained they don't trust them to not shoot themselves. I mean, that's why. They're poorly trained, not because they're some highly skilled military outfit.
Right, we've only got about 15 minutes left, so let's go over to Russia, Ukraine. We've got the first question from Susie. Why are we allowing Zelensky to spend all our money on houses and boats when the pensioners in the UK can't be afforded? If they blew up Nord Stream, how come nothing has come to them from that? It's disgusting how so many innocent Ukrainians have been killed, injured, displaced, and more. All of this needs to end. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I think we're witnessing the final days of Zelensky. That movie about Hitler and his bunker, Downfall. This could be called Downfall Part 2, where Zelensky is just as desperate and delusional as Hitler was in his final month alive. Only this time, Zelensky's not spending all of his time in a bunker, but what's taking place on the ground in Ukraine is the complete crumbling of the defensive line of the Ukrainian military. Russia's crushing them in Kursk and in the Donbass. So I expect that the money's drying up, and even if they had the money, the West doesn't have the actual equipment and weapons to sell him. They've run out. They've become old Mother Hubbard. The cupboards are bare.
So I don't know what the media's like over there, but the media in this country here in the UK, it's all drones destroy Russian tanks. Zelensky's got his path to victory. I mean, these are the same guys who told us Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. So
let's give them credit. They're consistent. Yeah, give them credit. They're consistent. All right, you got, hey guys, great. Whatever they say, do the exact opposite.
You got a question here. Please speculate regarding the repopulation of Ukraine following the end of this catastrophic, useless war. What will the future demographic look like?
The country's dying. It's not going to repopulate. So at the start of the war in January 2022, Population of Ukraine was about 42 million. And they were, at the time, they were able to track, do a correlation of the number of active cell phones in Ukraine at that time when they had a 42 million population. Now, using that same methodology, the numbers in Ukraine have fallen to 19 million. More than 50% of the population gone. Now, over 90% of them, well over 90%, are refugees. They've moved to other countries in Europe, in the United States, in South America. They've gone other places. But the Ukrainians also have suffered around at least 1 million killed in action, at least. Just in the last 2 months, there have been a focus on a cemetery in Kharkov, 2 cemeteries in Kharkov. And they were able to do sort of before and after pictures, and they could count the number of graves. 32,000 people buried there in the last month and a half. Those are Ukrainian soldiers. So, the ones who are dying, they're between the ages of 21, 22, and 50 years of age. Those are the guys that make babies. They're not making babies, man. They're food for worms now. They're dead. So the Ukraine is in a death spiral as a country demographically. That it's unrecoverable.
And my heart goes out to these dead young people in Ukraine, and a lot of it's at the hands of these psychopathic politicians. And when you say some of that blood is on the hands of Boris Johnson for scuppering the peace deal, he was out there last week visiting the wounded, blaming Putin, when this all could have ended 2 years ago, couldn't it, Larry?
Yeah, it did. It was a deal. The outlines of a deal were in place. And the outline of the deal was this: Russia was willing to cede Donetsk and Luhansk to the Ukrainian government in exchange for ironclad guarantee that the Russian language of those people would be respected, that they would not be persecuted, that they would have legal protections, and that Ukraine would enjoy NATO. That's all Russia wanted. They've said it from the outset. They said it before that. And when the Biden administration got wind of it, Lloyd Austin got a hold and got in touch with Boris Johnson, and Johnson was sent as the errand boy. And let me do as a disclaimer, while we both share the same last name, I am no relation to Boris Johnson, thank God. I got better hair than he does, and I'm older. So, but yeah, he went in and blew it up, and it wasn't just blowing up that agreement. This was a coordinated effort with MI6, because MI6 was involved with carrying out this covert action in Bucha, where they staged what they claimed was a massacre, Russian massacre, a human rights violation of where the Russians reportedly murdered all these Ukrainians. The only problem was that the Russian soldiers had left that village 3 days prior. And all the people that were showing up dead were the ones who wore white armbands on their arms that would symbolize that they were welcoming the Russians. They were killed by Ukrainians. And the bodies were staged and Western reporters brought in. And MI6 was directly involved with helping stage that. So, the Brits got the Brits and the Americans combined. Boy, we're a miserable lot. We are, in terms of causing death and mayhem in the world instead of peace. And a lot of times we get away with it. We cause all this death and destruction and never pay the price ourselves.
I think most people just want to live in peace, but the psychopathic leaders of Britain and America, definitely that applies. You got a question from Stella. How does Putin foresee ending the NATO incursion on Russia and its surrounding territories?
Well, I think the defeat of Ukraine is the first step. because that's going to sow dissension within NATO. One, and it's going to undermine complete credibility, confidence in the United States. And NATO is going to have to do some serious reassessment. Plus, they frankly spent themselves into oblivion. Both, the Americans, the Brits, the French, the Germans. Hey, the bill, the butcher's bill is coming due, and the economies are not in a condition to pay it. So then the money that's supposed to be allocated for NATO activities is going to fall to a low priority. I mean, I thought it was a joke when I saw that and you correct me if I'm wrong, that the Labor government basically voted to cut fuel subsidies for retirees and then up money being sent to Ukraine.
Pushing for long-range missiles.
That's absolutely, who does, a political moron wouldn't choose something so stupid. I mean, this is, it's shocking, absolutely shocking, because the Republicans usually get beat up with Democrats accusing them of wanting to push grandma off the cliff in a wheelchair, cutting Social Security. Well, cutting fuel subsidies as you're going into winter to the elderly, instead to send money to Ukraine, where Zelensky and his wife can use it to buy more property and pick your favorite sunny area on the globe. Really makes sense to me.
That's obscene. Got a question from Cosmic. Why do you think the General Secretary of the UN, Mr. S, former Prime of Norway, is not shutting down the satellite connection given to Zelensky by UN USA?
It ought to, but this is the West. The United Nations still is, I think, predominantly a Western-controlled institution. There's no way, and there's absolutely no reason that the United Kingdom and the French should have permanent seats on the Security Council and have veto power. Absolutely, it's ludicrous. They are not major players in terms of international economics, other than financial activities. But and then they continue to exclude countries that actually are, significant forces now in the world. So until that is corrected, you'll get the UN continuing to enable the likes of Zelensky.
Question from Ziva. What brought you to decide to be a truth teller, and are you not concerned about retaliation?
Well, I've always been a truth teller, or, I had a boss, 50 years ago, that said to me, Johnson, you're always sure. You're not always right, but you're always sure. So I have frequently spoken up. Now, back in 2003, even though I was considered a conservative and a Republican at the time, I spoke out against the war in Iraq. And, you got some retaliation out of that. When Valerie Plame, when I learned that she had been compromised and exposed by the Bush administration, I became very outspoken in defending her. And, I lost, there was a time when when I was considered, the right liked me. But then the right didn't like me once I started speaking out against the war. And then the left, they loved me. I was great because I was condemning George W. Bush. But then I started doing criticism of Barack Obama. And, oh, my God, you can't do that. So, and here's the guy gets the Nobel Peace Prize, and he ends up starting wars in Libya and Syria and helping kill hundreds of thousands more of Afghans, Syrians, and Libyans. Please, I don't want to hear about, what a great guy Barack Obama was. So, I've been an equal opportunity offender. And yeah, will they retaliate against me? Probably. They already have, actually. Um, my YouTube channel was obliterated, destroyed, erased just a week ago. So I'm now just Sonar 21, and I don't do advertising. I don't require people to subscribe in order to read what I write. I write and give people the chance they can make donations if they wish. If they think I'm worth donating to, great. If you just want to read and not pay, that's fine too. No obligation. I then also, I guess a week ago, Friday last, had a hit job on me by Voice of America, where the U.S. taxpayer dollars were used to give a platform to a Ukrainian political hack who was attacking me as, being some mouthpiece of Vladimir Putin. I've never had any communication with Putin. The Russians have never paid me to say anything. The opinions have always been my own. Just because my views perhaps coincide with Russia's doesn't mean it was pre-coordinated.
Larry, do you think any of these conflicts we've discussed today could escalate into all-out world nuclear war?
Yeah, the one in the Middle East, absolutely. I think the one in Ukraine is actually going to die out. The Ukrainians would like it to escalate to that point. They would like to get NATO involved and have NATO firing away. But I think enough countries have come to their senses. But plus, what's going on politically in places like Germany, where the Green Party's been just destroyed, and Scholz, SPD party, I believe, is really taking a shellacking at the polls. He's barely able to win in his last election in Brandenburg area. It's a sign that the German public has no interest in going to war. They got other problems. Their economy's in a tailspin.
And the steps for that, Larry, are Israel escalates to the surrounding countries, and then America and Russia, China. Is that how it would work?
Israel, the worst case scenario, Israel is going to decide it has no choice but to use a nuclear weapon or two in Iran. It launches those nukes. Remains to be seen whether or not they could hit the target, because Russians have provided Iran with advanced air defense systems that are capable of shooting down Israel's ballistic missiles. But if those missiles impact and there is a nuclear detonation, you then have the potential for other countries to get involved with attacking Israel. And Israel, frankly, will not be able to sustain those attacks. And being threatened with destruction, you'd see the United States intervene, and the U.S. intervention would potentially bring in the Chinese and the Russians. Because let's remember, for at least the last 5 years, the Russians and the Chinese have been carrying out annual military exercises with Iran. And in fact, just over the last 2 weeks, I think the Iranians and Russians have solidified a defensive agreement on military cooperation and defense. So any attack on Iran by Israel could be viewed as an attack on Russia, and Russia could respond accordingly. So yeah, that's how I see this thing could get out of hand.
Well, we've run out of time, Larry, and I can't thank you enough for your knowledge and experience and sharing all this with us. Could you just tell the viewers how they could find you and support you online?
If they go to sonar21.com, SONAR 21.com, that stands for Son of the New American Revolution, the 21st century. I am a member of the Sons of the American Revolution, because I have 28 ancestors that fought in the American Revolution. We don't mean to. I was on the side of my relatives were helping kick the Brits out, but a lot of them came out of England and Ireland and Scotland, so it was again one of those brother against brother thing, or cousin against cousin.
You need to kick Keir Starmer out next time he goes over there.
Oh my God, yeah. Please.
Well, thank you again for your time, Larry, and we hope to see you again sometime. But yeah, take care and cheers.
Sean, I appreciate the invite. Thank you.
Thank you. That was brilliant. Thanks. Guys, hope you enjoyed that as much as me. Thank you for all of your questions. We've had several experts on war on this week. So if you've missed those conversations, check them out. I think we've had about 4 in the last 2 weeks. And I'm going to be back in 1 hour, 10 p.m. We've got an hour of Diddy. We've got a guest on for the first half an hour. And then I'm going to be talking about an insider who's witnessed big name politicians at the freak offs. So I hope to see some of you guys in an hour's time.